And he is flying back to Washington. Once he gets there, he'll find the White House, the Capitol, and the Treasury have been evacuated, and he'll find the Pentagon is ablaze, victimized again by yet another attack, this one in the nation's capital. That one came at about 9:30 Eastern Time. Bill Plant is standing by with us at the White House or thereabouts. Bill, where are you and what are you getting?
Hello?
Bill? Bill? Bill Plant is standing by. Let's go ahead and see if we can't get our communication through with him. We are getting a report here. I'm looking. Paul Begala, Democratic consultant to Bill Clinton, is being quoted on the wire as saying he witnessed the explosion near the Pentagon shortly after two planes crashed in the World Trade Center. He says it was a huge fireball, a huge orange fireball, and he says another witness told him that a helicopter exploded. He is saying that another witness told him a helicopter exploded. Let's go to Bill Plant. Bill can't hear me, but I understand we can get his audio. So let's go ahead and signal Bill to tell us what he's got.
Bill Plant in Washington. I am across the street from the White House on the other side of Lafayette Park, approximately 1 block away. They have evacuated the entire White House staff and the staff of the old executive office building next door. We understand that the Treasury is also being evacuated. There's a lot of activity, fire trucks, ambulances, but as far as we know, there is no damage in the White House complex. I repeat, no damage that we know of in the White House complex. But this was in response to damage elsewhere, to the New York aircraft incidents and to whatever it was that happened at the Pentagon. But this is a full alert. The Secret Service has moved everybody away from the White House grounds, away from the White House complex. And they keep telling us that we have to remain a block away. There are fire trucks going by, ambulances going by, headed we know not where. But this is obviously a precautionary measure because no one clearly knows what to expect next. Brian?
All right, Bill Plant. And again, Bill is unable to hear us. We were able to get his audio in here, but as you can imagine, it is I'm sure a frantic scene down in the nation's capital this morning, as it is here in New York, as we've been watching down at the southern tip of Manhattan. Jane Clayson is with me here in New York, and I apologize for talking throughout, but you've been watching. Go ahead, Jane.
Well, I just wonder how many people are in the building right now. We haven't been able to assess if people have been coming out of the building, if there have been people on the ground. One man reportedly had some burns from some debris that had fallen from the building, but we still haven't been able to assess if there are injuries, or obviously there are many hundreds or if not thousands of people affected, says James Kallstrom, formerly of the FBI, but we still don't know that, and that's one looming question.
Yeah, I mean, you at this point, you hate to jump to conclusions and you don't want to throw numbers around, but if, and again, I put if in capital letters, if we are talking about two commercial aircraft plowing into the World Trade Center during business hours or shortly before the business day begins at 9 a.m., we are talking about some considerable numbers of dead and injured.
And not just at the World Trade Center, now at the Pentagon in Washington as well.
Also at the Pentagon. And we're looking at a list of some of the businesses on the upper levels of the World Trade Center, and none of them have any affiliation with the government. But again, the World Trade Center isn't necessarily a government building. It is there's U.S. Customs above the 70th floor, but the World Trade Center, more than anything, is a symbol of the United States, a symbol of U.S. progress, a symbol of U.S. might, located as it is down at the heart of Wall Street. And so if in fact it was targeted, it was because of its symbolic value. Producer Laura Shane was by the Pentagon when it was hit. Let's go there again. She can't hear us, but she can speak with us. Laura, somebody cue her.
Hello?
All right. Obviously, we're having problems with Laura Shane's audio. Again, at this point, we don't know whether that Pentagon explosion was the result of an aircraft crashing into it or a bomb that was deployed near there. We had an unconfirmed report that it was a helicopter that had crashed into the building. You can still see some flames down there in the lower right-hand corner. Now we are getting a report that they believe it was a plane. But again, we do not have any confirmation of that, nor do we have any idea what the numbers involved here are.
These are the first scenes from the ground, it appears.
Yeah, these These are scenes from near the Pentagon in the nation's capital. We don't know how close to the Pentagon these are. Obviously, that is not the Pentagon in the background, so we're talking of a neighboring area. We're not getting any numbers at this point. We do know that an FBI team has been dispatched from the nation's capital to investigate what has gone on at the World Trade Center. But at this point, our information is sketchy. Looking at a report here now, the first plane to hit the World Trade Center was a hijacked aircraft that had taken off from Boston, supposedly an American Airlines Boeing 767 out of Logan. This is the second aircraft. We don't know whether or not this aircraft was, as earlier reported, a United Airlines aircraft. We are also getting word out of Chicago that the Sears Tower, the tallest structure in that city, has been evacuated. Before we have to step aside, as we're getting another look at the second attack, we understand a Pentagon witness is with us in Washington. Good morning. This is Bryant Gumbel in New York. Could you identify yourself, please? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Could you identify yourself for me?
Yes, my name is Jim Dorsett.
And Jim, how close are you to the Pentagon? Okay, we're obviously having some problems making that connection with the eyewitness in Washington. We have just a minute left. Let's go ahead and recount what we do know. At 8:45 Eastern Time on a clear day on the southern tip of Manhattan, not one but two aircraft plowed into the World Trade Center. We don't know at this point if they were private aircraft. We don't know if it was intentional. Of hijacking. Shortly after that, about an hour after that, there was an explosion at the Pentagon. At this point, the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol, and the Treasury have been evacuated in Washington. In New York, all airports, tunnels, and bridges have been closed, and in Chicago, the Sears Tower has been evacuated. We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2. With that, we will leave you and turn it over to Dan Rather.
This is CBS News continuing live coverage of the apparent terrorist attacks today here in New York City and in Washington, D.C. It's important to say these things at the very beginning. There is much that is not known about what is happening. The second thing is that the word from almost everybody who's trying to deal with the situation, the word of the day is steady. Steady. Yes, there have been some terrible things happening, but until and unless we know the facts, it's very difficult to draw many conclusions. Now, here's what we know. Just before 9 Eastern Time this morning, a plane crashed into one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center along the Hudson River here in New York. A few minutes later, a second plane crashed into the other tower. Both skyscrapers are on fire. Evacuations have been underway for a long while. There are known injuries. How many? Much too soon to know, and whether there's any death or not, it is too soon to know. Yes, there are widespread assumptions that there must be death, but there are no confirmed fatalities. Now, in Washington, the Pentagon has had a fire and explosions, much speculation of what would have caused the fires and explosions at the Pentagon in Washington, but very few facts. David Martin, our Pentagon correspondent, says that he has seen, I believe it said 5 injured people at the Pentagon. One eyewitness, and only one so far, is quoted as saying he thinks, I put that in quotation marks, he thinks a plane crashed into the Pentagon. But there'll be rumors all day, and we're going to try to separate the rumors from the facts. Now, you're looking at a live picture of the twin towers of the World Trade Center. In flames, with much smoke. In the last few minutes, there have been 2 reports, but not yet officially confirmed, that a portion of at least one of the towers has collapsed. But I caution that that's an unconfirmed report, although it comes from 2 sources, and it's unclear whether that collapse is about the interior of the building or some portion of the exterior of the building. I want to emphasize again, not to be redundant, but this is a day in which rumors are going to spread like mildew in damp basements. And there'll be reports. Some of them will be officially confirmed, some not. That's the environment in which we're dealing. Now, President Bush was in Florida this morning. He called this an apparent act of terrorism and rushed back to Washington. The president is in the air going back to Washington at the moment. Now, in Washington, the reports spread that a plane also crashed at the Pentagon. See, as David Martin says, there are at least several injuries. Several is the word he used. The FAA has banned all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. Here in New York, the city is on a full terrorist alert. Bridges and tunnels are closed. You recall the World Trade Center was the target of a terrorist bombing in 1993. Now, again, it's important to point out that with television, what we can show you is what is at the end of the television camera. The whole city is not in smoke and flames, not by a long shot. The city is on a terrorist alert. Entry into the city has been closed off. Tunnels and bridges are closed off as a precautionary measure. But, you know, in many, many areas of New York City, life goes on this morning, and the same is true in Washington, D.C. So just keep in mind that when you see this picture constantly, it's of one section of New York City, and we go to Washington for the picture there, the Pentagon, the same thing. These pictures are not in real time. As you can see, that made it look like that the flames were spreading. This picture steadied now. For those of you familiar with the city, the World Trade Center at the end of Manhattan Island, 2 twin towers. Apparently, 2 aircraft, one hit into one of the towers and then another hit into the other tower. What kind of aircraft were they? We simply do not know what kind of planes they were. Witnesses described them as, quote, large aircraft. Yes, you may have heard reports, but the reports are unconfirmed, that there was one aircraft that had been hijacked. There continue to be reports. I'm pausing, taking in information as I speak to you. There are increasing reports that on one of the World Trade Center towers, that portions of the tower have collapsed. Now, this would not be surprising to have this proven to be true, given the smoke and flames that have been pouring out of these buildings for what now, well over an hour. I want to underscore again that both towers have been hit. Both towers, each tower, was hit by an aircraft, incoming aircraft. The origin of the aircraft, what kind of planes, unknown. I was saying before there have been these reports, but the reports are unconfirmed, that an aircraft in the Eastern Air Corridor may have been hijacked this morning and may have been one of the planes that crashed in the World Trade Center. None of that is confirmed. CBS News veteran correspondent Harold Dow is on the telephone now from a section of the city where these twin towers are in flames and smoke. Harold, if you hear us, come in.
Yeah, I arrived on the scene about an hour and a half ago, and believe it or not, there was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it, came down, sending smoke and debris everywhere. I had to do all I could to run to get away from all the debris. Me and a number of other people here are trapped in the subway here in a shoe store, actually trying to get away from most of the debris. It's just an incredible sight. They had a lot of emergency workers around the building, and of course everybody's hoping that these people were able to get out of there without being injured. But it is a surreal and devastating scene over here, something like I've never seen before.
Harold, exactly where are you in filing this report?
Dan, I'm at a subway station. I just ran down the stairs. I didn't even look at it. It's right around the corner from the World Trade Center, and I'm kind of waiting for that smoke and debris to blow away to go back upstairs. But it's just an unbelievable situation here.
Well, Harold, if I may, take a deep breath, take a series of deep breaths, and then let me ask you, have you seen any indication that would tend to confirm these reports, which have been growing in intensity, that a section of the World Trade Center has collapsed onto the street below? Do you see any confirmation of that in any direction?
That is true, Dan. That's what we were all running from. We heard the building coming down, and that's what we were running from. Literally, people ran out of their shoes trying to get out of the way of this thing.
Well, one can certainly understand that. So Harold Dow, our man on the scene, reports that he can confirm that a section, we do not know how large a section of one of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed into the street below. Now, for those of you who are joining us in progress, it's Dan Rather at CBS News World Headquarters in New York with Russ Mitchell at my side here, covering a breaking news situation. 2 airplanes One just before 9 o'clock Eastern Time, the other shortly later. One each crashed into one each of the World Trade Center buildings here in New York. Something, we know not exactly what has happened at the Pentagon in Washington. There are unconfirmed reports that a plane crashed into the Pentagon and started a large fire there. There have been some people injured at the Pentagon. How many, we do not know. David Martin on the scene at the Pentagon says he saw several people injured. There are other, and I repeat, totally unconfirmed reports at Pentagon that it wasn't a plane that went into the Pentagon, it was a helicopter, and then there are yet third versions of this that say a plane and a helicopter may have crashed into the Pentagon. But all of that is in the area of unconfirmed fact. Something started a fire with some explosion at the Pentagon not long after the two World Trade Centers were hit by separate aircraft. Mika Brzezinski is downtown. Mika?
Yep. Hi, Mika Brzezinski here reporting from PS 89. It's near the scene of the now collapse of what we believe to be the Tower Number 1 of the World Trade Center. I was standing with CBS News correspondent Byron Pitts. We were coordinating our crews in a crowd of people near the corner of Murray Avenue and the West Side Highway when the collapse occurred, and literally plumes of smoke and gases as the collapse happened, I'm sure you're seeing in the video, began to roll our way, and that is when the crowd went wild. People just began to run. Our live trucks shut down. Crews were running. Reporters were running. People were running. And the cops literally were just waving their arms saying, go, go, go. We are inside the school right now, actually inside a small room, trying to stay clear of the crowds that are trying to get out of the way, and also the evacuation of this school. School officials here are trying to get everybody out of the building in an orderly fashion as quickly as possible. But again, there is so much confusion out on the street. It is literally chaos out there. We've got a short timeline here. The school right now is now putting on the intercom where kids need to go to assemble classes near Chambers Street. They're trying to organize the classes and get these kids out of here as safely as possible. Right now we're dealing with the air because of the plumes of smoke and gases. Byron pointed out to me we needed to move quickly because the smoke that was rolling our way and the debris as well was very thick, and it could be very dangerous. It was already a chaotic situation before the collapse happened, and this is just piling more danger and damage on top of what was already a very chaotic situation. We're dealing with a wide range of emotions out here on the street as well. You've got typical New Yorkers. I actually ran with my producer, Mike Noble, about a mile to get here before we hopped onto a golf cart and got someone to bring us right up to the scene. And what we saw were people who were walking nonchalantly. It's New York, kind of looking back at what they could see, and others completely upset, crying. One woman had to get off her bike because she was so upset. I think a lot of people in a situation like this, even if they're not close to it, all of a sudden feel that fear. They feel that maybe this was deliberate. What is happening in our city? But in a sense right now, we are dealing with a situation where two planes hit the World Trade Towers, one after the other. We're not necessarily sure how and why it happened. You've got some witnesses saying that they saw one of the planes, I believe the DC-3, or maybe it was the smaller plane. I think it was the smaller plane that appeared to be flying directly toward the tower, but no one can be sure right now. What we've got is hundreds of ambulances, hundreds of fire crews. I mean, I could not count the fire trucks and the crews that passed us as I was running to the scene, blaring their sirens, trying to get there as quickly as possible, trying to get to those injured and to the casualties. At this point, nobody knows how many casualties, but it appears there will be some. Back to you.
Mika Brzezinski reporting from the area of Manhattan where you see these smoke and flames. The two twin World Trade Centers hit this morning separately by aircraft. Now, let me underscore that New York is not burning. One section of New York has had a terrible thing happen, what President Bush has called an apparent terrorist attack. And in Washington, D.C., an apparent terrorist attack. I underscore the word apparent terrorist attack on the Pentagon. CBS News veteran Defense Department correspondent David Martin is on the telephone from the area. David, do you hear us?
The White House.
We're having some difficulty bringing in David Martin. These pictures from outside the Pentagon are of people who were injured in the explosion and fire. There, we're trying to bring in David Martin, who is on the grounds of the Pentagon. As you might well understand, cell phone traffic has been extremely busy this morning, so busy that it makes it difficult to get any cell phone communication in Manhattan, New York, and for that matter in Washington itself. So while we try to get David Martin up, you're looking at a live picture from the Pentagon in Washington. Keep in mind, 2 airplanes hit one each of the Twin Towers World Trade Centers in New York, and in the Pentagon, nobody knows what started it. Nobody knows for sure what started it. Apparently, a plane and or a helicopter was flown into the Pentagon, but that's not been confirmed. There was an explosion fire in the Pentagon. These pictures have to do with casualties injured at the Pentagon. If anybody has been killed, we are not yet aware of it. We go to Jim Stewart in our Washington Bureau. Jim?
And here in Washington, the police now have closed down the Capitol, the House and Senate. They have closed down the Justice Department. The World Bank has been emptied. We are told that the Metropolitan Police Department of Washington now is on full alert with the anticipation that there could be additional targets if, in fact, someone is targeting sites in the nation's capital. We are told that the FAA has grounded all flights, all domestic flights in the United States. One building that has not closed down is the FBI. The FBI has established an emergency command post in the center of its building. It's a contained area that is presumably safe from bombs, they believe, and FBI officials have been there now for the last 2 hours trying to sort out exactly what is going on. I can tell you, Dan, that the working theory here is that this is the work of terrorists. They specifically believe this is the work of Osama bin Laden. This is pure speculation at the moment. As recently as yesterday, Dan, when we were making our rounds on what the latest terrorist threats were in the United States and abroad, there was no hint whatsoever that there was a threat against any domestic target in the United States. There had not been any domestic intercepts of messages. There had been no sense that there were people here who should not be here. The feeling was that there were threats against targets overseas, but not here in the United States. They tell me, frankly, that there is a roadmap, a blueprint, if you will, for precisely what happened today, and that was signed by Ramzi Youssef. This is the bomber who was involved in the World Trade Center originally and who had plans to hijack aircraft and target buildings in the United States, specifically the CIA. Mr. Youssef, of course, was captured by the FBI. He's incarcerated here in the United States. But this is precisely the game plan that was talked out some 7 to 8 years ago by terrorists associated with Osama bin Laden. One note of concern here at the FBI already is that their field office, Dan, in New York is located at 26th and Federal. That is very, very close to the World Trade Center. Judging from the pictures here, my guess is that they have probably been incapacitated themselves and they'll have to move elsewhere in the short term. Dan?
Jim Stewart in our Washington Bureau. The top half of one World Trade Center building has collapsed and portions of the building have fallen onto the street below. Now, Mika Brzezinski is in that part of Manhattan where the World Trade Centers are located. We pick up her eyewitness reports now. Mika?
Dan, with the collapse now that we witnessed here firsthand, you get a sense there of not only the chaos that is here on the streets of what happened with the 2 planes that hit the World Trade Towers, but also the depth of the disaster and the loss here of life. I'm sitting here huddled in a small room in PS 89 right near the scene where this school actually has been evacuated right now, and we're huddled by the phone trying to get information to you. And Byron Pitts and I were standing right in plain view of the collapse, and Byron counted 7 people jumping from the building. So you get a sense now of not just the disaster, the visual disaster that you're dealing with and the possibility of casualties, but you get a sense of a massive, at this point, loss of life. There was also mass chaos on the street when this happened. There were crowds of people being held back by police about 2 blocks from the scene, and what we had was just a rampage of people trying to get away, because after that collapse, you can see from the video the plumes, the billowing, the rolling smoke and gases and debris literally flying in the air after the reverberations of the collapse. People just started to run. There were those who were there just to look at it, just to watch what was happening, some even, into it for the excitement value. And their emotions turned from excitement to complete fear and horror that they too might be hurt in this. And of course, there's the fears for the people who were inside the building, the people who Byron saw jump, but also who was underneath there, who might have been closer to the scene. Because I'm telling you, you hear me? Can you all hear me? We're being evacuated here from the building, and I'll just tell you real quickly, when that collapse happened, if it had been on our side of the building, we would have been covered with that debris. That collapse spread far and wide, and the crowds that were nearby to look at this, I don't think we're far enough from the scene. Now, I'm inside a school, which is 3-4 blocks from where this whole disaster happened, and they were methodically trying to get the kids out of here and get them out of here fast. They saw the rolling smoke and the debris coming towards.
And again, from some of the witnesses on the street, these people very lucky to get away, I would think.
Obviously, the chaos on the streets of both cities now, and cities across, Rosemary, that country, I should imagine. I understand they've also evacuated the Sears Tower in Chicago.
That's right. I mean, every airport in this country has been shut down. Obviously, all of them, or everyone, is concerned that another airplane could be taken as a hostage situation. So the airports are shut down. Most of the major government buildings are shut down. Anything that is of any symbolic importance in the United States has been shut down. Washington itself, of course, is the capital of all of those places, as well as New York, as we saw with the World Trade Exchange. But here in Washington, there are so many potential targets, the White House being one. We've seen the Capitol now with this apparent explosion, the Pentagon, the White House, the State Department. The list goes on and on and on. And in all of those places today, people have been told to leave work quickly, carefully. But of course, people are in a panic situation. This is a city that feels under siege.
We are looking at pictures, and again, we're going to get back to Rosemary Thompson, where there have been 2 strikes, Capitol Hill and also the Pentagon in Washington. And we are looking at pictures in New York City. That was videotape of, I believe that's the South Tower.
That's right.
That collapsed earlier, and the panic and chaos that ensued. Alan, you just flashed me over a note and said that the flames indicate that it was a bomb. And that was the plane. That was the second strike.
That was the second strike. I hadn't seen any of the video footage before, but when that explosion, the explosion I just saw on that video was definitely an explosion of a bomb-type material. Because
a plane would not explode like that?
It would. But what I'm saying is, it was not a normal explosion because of the flame, the red flame, the smoke, which indicates a clear explosion of some description.
Does that surprise you then? I mean, if there was some kind of explosive on an American Airlines plane, it means somebody got through security somewhere.
Yeah.
Is Boston, I mean, that's the largest Logan, isn't that one of the...
That's right.
But also a very busy airport. Very busy, one of the busiest airports, and it's a big airport, but it's very congested there.
But you have to remember, the bomb could be the aircraft.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's what you need with the fuel. You don't need to put a bomb on an aircraft.
Again, looking at pictures now from Washington, D.C.
And we have an eyewitness out of Washington who reports that the plane that hit the Pentagon was flying low and fast. Again, strategy, Alan, on this kind of attack, you know, for people just joining us, give us some perspective on this type of attack, jumping in, hijacking an airplane and slamming it literally into buildings full of thousands of people.
One of the biggest problems that they have in Washington is, as I said, is the national airport in close proximity. I was in Washington a week ago, and there was planes flying all over the city at heights anywhere from about 500 feet to about 1,000 feet.
The Capitol have been reported over the last hour and a half. But this is a fluid situation, this breaking story situation. And to bring you up to date, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center have been hit, each by one aircraft, one slightly before 9 o'clock, one just after 9 o'clock Eastern time this morning. And a short time after that, this picture you see on the right of your screen emerged from the Pentagon. What happened at the Pentagon, unclear, but there are eyewitness reports that an aircraft crashed into the Pentagon. Obviously, authorities are taking every precaution that they can, and amid this report, the unconfirmed report that another civilian airliner possibly has been hijacked somewhere in the Washington area is leading to yet another series of investigations. The Associated Press now, in a flash, quoting the Associated Press, one World Trade Center tower has collapsed. Period. And let's pause for a moment, because given the photographs, the live pictures we have, it's very difficult to confirm that report that a whole tower has collapsed. We're going to stick with the moment, for the moment, with the report that a portion of one of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed. Perhaps that's what the Associated Press means. With me here is Russ Mitchell in New York. Russ, seeing these pictures of the World Trade Center, both towers aflame, all that smoke down in that part of Manhattan, is reminiscent of what happened in the World Trade Center not quite 10 years ago.
That's right. It was February 26, 1993. 6 people were killed in a terrorist bombing, over 1,000 people injured. And for folks who are really not familiar with the World Trade Center, let's kind of put things in perspective for you. These are twin towers. They were dedicated back in 1973. They are each more than 1,300 feet tall, 110 stories. As Mika Brzezinski reported a few minutes ago, 50,000 people work in these twin towers, and we're talking about things from brokerage firms to law firms and other offices on those floors. To give you an idea of the amount of folks and the size we're talking about here, each tower of the World Trade Center has its own zip code. Each tower has its own zip code. It is a symbol of American capitalism. And when this happened, I know back in 1993, Dan, the thought was that the World Trade Center, along with other major buildings in the United States, in New York, were targets for this because they were symbols of America. And anyone who was out to prove something would hit these targets. And just like the World Trade Center, by the way, were the tallest buildings in the world before they were displaced by the Sears Tower in Chicago, which has also been evacuated this morning.
In that last attack on the World Trade Center, the terrorist attack for which the attackers were tracked down and convicted and imprisoned, at least some of them, the plan at that time by the terrorist planners was a series of attacks. They intended to attack not only the World Trade Center, but also the United Nations and at least one of the tunnels leading into New York City. Now, what's happened this morning on the prima facie case so far is that this was a coordinated series of attacks which succeeded with the World Trade Centers and with the Pentagon. Now, from the scene, you heard Mika Brzezinski earlier report that she saw people literally running out of their shoes, or I think it was Harold Dow, who reported that. Let me pause and say that a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department in Washington. So in Washington, something has hit the Pentagon. Witnesses say they believe an aircraft crashed into the Pentagon, a portion of the Pentagon, and there have been injuries there. Now a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department in Washington. No further details available on that. Most international air flights scheduled to come in the United States are being diverted to Canada. The FAA has asked that no aircraft be in the air anywhere in the United States if possible, what amounts to an air travel lockdown in the United States, as the country is obviously under a concerted attack of some kind. Certainly not the whole country, but selected targets, the World Trade Center, Twin Towers, the Pentagon, now a car bomb outside the State Department. It's what's being called a well-orchestrated orgy of terrorism. It's filled the skies here in Manhattan with black smoke and flames, and a portion, at least a portion, of one of the World Trade Center buildings has collapsed. I repeat for emphasis that the Associated Press, very reliable, perhaps the world's most reliable wire service, says that, quote, a tower has collapsed. However, we don't confirm that, and what our eyes tell us is that a portion of one of the towers has collapsed, but perhaps not the tower itself. But at any rate, black smoke, flames, a lot of rumors, certainly some death and destruction, but how much is unclear. There have been injuries at the Pentagon, certainly injuries at the World Trade Center. It's difficult to believe that there are not some deaths connected with the World Trade Center, that some people were seen jumping from windows in the World Trade Center. We go now to Washington. CBS News correspondent Cheryl Atkinson. Cheryl?
What I saw regarding the Pentagon this morning around 9:45, headed on the George Washington Parkway, which, as you know, borders the Potomac River on the Virginia side, listening to CBS radio as to what was happening in New York. And I immediately thought about the Washington Monument and the White House, of course, which are always considered possible